if you take an orange seed and you plant it in your front yard and you woke up the next day and there was an orange tree there with oranges on it, that would be a miracle. But if you take that seed and you plant it in your front yard and you give it sun and water and take care of it, first year goes by and you give it fertilizer and you let it do its thing, and the second year goes by, and fourth, fifth, sixth year, and the seventh year, and finally you walk out of your house and you walk up to that orange tree and you pick an orange off of it, well, that's still a miracle.
Well, hello, friends of Bill W. and other friends. You have landed on Sober Speak. My name is John M. I am an alcoholic, and we are glad you're all here, especially newcomers. Newcomers, that is, both to recovery as a whole and newcomers to this podcast. Sober Speak is a podcast about recovery centered around the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. My job here on Sober Speak is simple. My job is to provide a platform to the amazing stories of recovery all around us. Consider Sober Speak, if you will, your meeting between meetings. Please remember, we do not speak for AA or any 12-step community. We represent only ourselves. We are here to share our experience, strength, and hope with those who wish to come along for the ride. Take what you want and leave the rest at the curb for the trash man to pick up. Ooh la la! From Studio AA deep in the heart of Texas. That there was the voice of Mr. Tim D that you heard at the beginning of this episode here, episode number 264. And guess what? You will be hearing so much more from him in un momento. But first things first, this here episode is brought to you by, sponsored by, if you will, Dave, Andrew, Kate, Marie, David, Kim, Michelle, and Clinton. What, you may ask, did Dave, Andrew, Kate, Marie, David, Kim, Michelle, and Clinton do? Well, they went to our website, soberspeak.com, clicked on that little yellow donate tab, and they made a contribution. So thank you so much, Dave, Andrew, Kate, Marie, David, Kim, Michelle, and Clinton. This here episode is coming right out to Ewan's. So, you know, I just remembered I had a gentleman email me just recently. I think he emailed me. It could have been through Instagram or something like that. But he said, will you please set up a Venmo to make this easier to donate? So I don't know. I may look at that here in the near future. I try to keep it as simple as possible. But thank you, though, for that suggestion. All right. What do we have today? Well, first of all, it's a Sunday here. I just did my little pregame warm-up. In other words, I took a sniff or two of that peppermint essential oils that I had to get ready for, I don't know, recording a podcast. My daughter is excited because she's in one of these other rooms because she's listening to Taylor Swift. Apparently, Miss Taylor Swift has just released some new musica, and she is very excited about that. And I like Taylor Swift. I'm not a Taylor Swift fan. What do they call Taylor Swift's fans? I guess it'd be like a Swiftie or something like that. Or is there an actual title for the fans? I could go ask my daughter. I'm sure she'd know. But anyway, she's doing that. My son is working on his PC. The PC was overheating. He built the PC from the ground up. It's overheating, and he's out there working on that. In fact, I think what he's going to have to do actually is take it to Best Buy and have the Geek Squad or whatever they're called up there work on it. He's been working on it for some time now, but it's actually cool to watch him build a PC from the ground up. You know, I just thought everybody bought them from stores, but apparently you can do that, and he's been doing that. The lovely Mrs. M is downstairs right now. She's doing some cooking. And my sister-in-law, her sister, is about to come over for a visit, and I'm trying to get this here episode done before that occurs so I can say hello as well. Oh, and it is a Sunday, and I am deep into some football, but I'm taking taking a break here to keep the beast fed. And when I say the beast fed, the episodes, right? You got to keep feeding the beast episode after episode after episode, and but I enjoy it very much. Keep in mind, everybody, that we are gonna have a big shindig. What do I mean by that? Well, it's going to be a Sober Speak Live again, December 2nd at the Grace Avenue United Methodist Church in Frisco, Texas. And who do you think, I should to say who you may ask is going to be the special guest, but it doesn't really, I don't know, that doesn't flow. But nonetheless, the special guest who will be with me and with all of us at this wonderful event is going to be Gary K. Yes, the one and only Gary K. from Sulphur Springs, Texas. So we have him coming in, and it's going to be, like I said, it's going to be a live event. It starts at 6:30 p.m. If you go to our website, www.soberspeak.com. There's a tab across the top of the website, and it says Sober Speak Live. You can click on that, and guess what? It'll give you all the details. And we're actually not only going to be doing it live, but we're going to do it live like in person, but we're also going to do it live via Zoom. And I don't have the information up there yet, but I bet by the time you hear this, I will have that information up there. So if you are in New Zealand, or you're in the United Kingdom, or you're in the United States, or wherever you happen to be, you can tune in and watch our event live with me and Gary K. And not only are we going to have Sober Speak Live event, but on the tail end of that, in the same room after the event, the Frisco group, which I attend, I'm sure many of you have heard me talk about it in the past, here in Frisco, Texas, is going to have their holiday party right after that on December 2nd. So you get a lot of the people that I gather up or request that they be on the podcast are from that group. Oh gosh, there's David G. I don't want to start going down the list because I'm going to miss somebody. But anyway, you'll be able to meet them in person if you would like to do that. So anyway, I look forward to, if you have any questions on that, feel free to email me at johnjohn@soberspeak.com. And if you have any questions that you want me to ask of Gary K., feel more than free to go ahead and send me your questions. We may not be able to get it on. And by the way, the event is free. We pass the basket at the end to cover some expenses, but just so you know that. But we may not be able to get your question to Gary K. I've only got a certain amount of time, but I would be interested to know what you would like to hear. I think also we will be having live music. And every time I hear that, I think of live music as opposed to a dead person playing music. But you get what I'm saying. There's going to be somebody playing music up there. And even if they're not playing music up there live, we will have music being played in the venue that we're at, because the church is very well set up. All right. Let me see here. Kim reached out. She DM'd via the Insta this week, and she said, John, today is my 13 years sober. I don't have anyone to tell or celebrate it with, and it makes me sad. But, of course, it also makes me happy, just that I've made it this long. The last few years have been especially good because of your podcast. I've learned so much. Thank you for being there. You, John, your guest, and hey, all your Sober Speak listeners, I'm glad you're out there too. Happy birthday to me. And she puts a little party smiley face guy. And so I just wanted to say happy birthday, Kim, on your 13 years. If I remember right, Kim, you basically listen in on the podcast. You've never been to a meeting. It's not your thing. But, as far as I am concerned, Miss Kim, you are indeed an honorary member of Alcoholics Anonymous. You probably, because you listen to Sober Speak so much, you probably know more about Alcoholics Anonymous than some of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous. But we sure would love to get you in a meeting today. So now you are not celebrating by yourself. You're celebrating with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of listeners. So happy birthday. Happy 13th birthday, Kim. Now on to our speaker, Mr. Tim D. This here episode is called The Orange Tree. Tim has been sober since 1987. We talk about several things. We talk about the miracle of an orange tree and what that means, and thus why we have it as the title of this here episode. We talk about W.C. Fields. I love W.C. Fields. What does he say? Oh, and we talk about it in here. It's loopholes, my friend. Looking for loopholes. So we talk about W.C. Fields. We talk about Tim driving naked through a bar on a moped. Yes, we get ourselves in some uncomfortable situations for sure. Probably more uncomfortable for all the other people. We talk about the shame drinking causes. We talk about Harry the Wino, Big Book Dick, Crazy Margie, and Woody. And then we talk about, quote, not drinking, unquote, and what that means. All right, everybody. Enjoy Tim D, and we will have plenty listener feedback at the end of this episode. And this is going to be a little bit of an interesting listener feedback, just because, I think I'm going to start a segment called John M. Sucks. Or John M. Bites, maybe John M. Stinks. I don't know. Down with John M. Something like that. So I'm going to play you a clip of somebody who is not one of my biggest fans. It's a voicemail on the end of this episode. But in the meantime, please enjoy Tim D. Okay, everybody. So today we're sitting here with Tim D. So Tim, first things first, why don't you go ahead, introduce yourself, give your sobriety date if you wish, and tell people where you live.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tim. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is December 26, 1987, and I'm living in Cleveland, Ohio.
So let me just go ahead and tell everybody how we met. So we have had another Tim on the podcast in the past. His name is Tim F. A lot of people will be familiar with him. It's fairly recent. We recorded an episode with him, a couple of episodes actually. And Tim, I guess you guys have been great friends for years, or at least friends of some sort. And he highly recommended you to be on the podcast. So are everyone of Tim's friends named Tim, or is this just some sort of coincidence?
Well, we met, I don't know, about 10 years ago, I guess. I was traveling for work, and we were both living in Columbia, Maryland. And both of us got sober at a young age, and both of us had jobs that had odd hours. And we both ended up in the same home group, which was on Friday nights at 10:37. And it was a young people's meeting, and it was called the Spiritual Kindergarten. Oh. And the funny thing about that home group was it used to be in the book as 10:30, and they switched it through Group Conscious to 10:37. And because they never started on time. And as soon as they switched it to 10:37, attendance doubled probably in like three or four months. And so we were the, I don't know if, I guess Tim was more the curmudgeon of the group. I'm just kidding. He really wasn't. But, and we both just became friends, and he was there a couple months before I was. So he was Tim, and I was Tim too. So
you were Tim too. So you didn't go by Tim F. and
No.
Tim D. It was
Right.
Tim and Tim 2.
Right.
That's great. All right. So it sounds like you're up in the Cleveland area. How long have
Mhm.
you been up in the Cleveland area?
Since we moved, since my family moved, in 1976, I guess is when we moved. And I guess that's a good as part to start as any, really.
Go for it.
When I was young, we did move a lot. I was born in Lockport, New York, and we moved around a lot. My dad changed jobs, and I don't really remember anything out of the ordinary growing up that way. And I remember when we moved to Cleveland, things kind of changed at my house, and my dad traveled a lot for work. I would come home and my mom would be taking a nap on the kitchen floor, and Dad was gone a lot, and there'd be bottles around, and there was a lot of fighting. And up until that point, I'd always seen drinking as something that my parents did socially and had parties. And I don't even know when my first drink was. I'm sure it was actually like a cherry out of my dad's Manhattan or something like that. But I don't remember necessarily my first drink. But because we'd always get sips of my uncle's beer, or could have half a beer or something like that. But when we moved to Cleveland and Dad was traveling a lot, my mother's alcoholism really showed up. And I joke about her taking a nap on the kitchen floor and stuff, but that was, I don't know, a year or two of that kind of behavior when she was really in the bottom of her alcoholism. And then, like I said, lots of fights, and my father trying to prevent it and locking cabinet doors and throwing away all the alcohol, and me not really understanding what was going on. And I had an older sister who tried to take care of us, and a younger sister and younger brother. And then one day, I guess I was in 6th or 7th grade, things kind of changed. And 1 or 2, 3 nights a week, my mom would leave after dinner, and she would come home at 10 o'clock, and she was going to these meeting things, and stuff's, life, I guess, kind of started getting a little more normal around the house. And then at that same time, I was now a teenager, and I hear a lot of leads where like people are like, I didn't fit in, and I always didn't feel different. I always felt different, and I always didn't understand things. I remember always being one who would seek out justice, like if something was fair or unfair. But at the same time, I kind of thought that rules were great, but they didn't necessarily apply to me. Years later, I remember being in a meeting and somebody showing me a picture of W.C. Fields looking through a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the caption said, "Loopholes. I'm looking for loopholes."
Yeah.
And I was that kid who was always looking for the loopholes to get away with stuff, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the original scene from that is he's in one of his movies and he's looking at the Bible.
Oh, it is? Yeah, and somebody must have changed it to the big book.
Right, and somebody came into the room and they said, "Oh, look, we didn't really expect him to be reading the Bible." And they said,
Right.
"What are you doing?" He said, "Loopholes, looking for loopholes."
So, but it's very applicable. I mean, especially when you see newcomers in the meetings, that still applies, I think, sometimes. You see that behavior, and I was that guy. And one of the things I always remembered was I was that kid who, I'd pray to God for a bike, and I wouldn't get it. I'd pray for God for a bike, and I wouldn't get it. I'd pray to God for a bike, I wouldn't get it. So finally, I would just steal one and ask for forgiveness. And that always, that joke always made perfect sense to me. I didn't really steal the bike, but the joke made sense. And, my mom and dad ended up, I guess she was about a year sober, and they ended up getting a divorce. And, but my mom moved about 3 miles away from my dad.
Just real quick, do you have any idea what, how your mom was exposed to Alcoholics Anonymous? Was that ever discussed?
How she was exposed, I don't know. I think she finally I think they called the 12-step line. And I think some women came over and they did a 12-step call on her. I'm about 90% sure that that's what happened.
Gotcha. Okay, so you said she moved about 3 miles away from your dad, and then what?
Mm-hmm. And then we lived with her, but it'd be every other Wednesday and every other weekend we would spend with my father. And it was quickly apparent that there was like two sets of rules. And kind of at the same time, I started working in restaurants, and I started, sneaking beers here and sneaking, just normal hot stuff, I guess, for an '80s kid in high school. And but the rules were different at each house. My dad suspected that I went out drinking on a Saturday night and I'd come home maybe a little drunk or tipsy. Instead of 10:30 mass on Sunday morning, we would go to 9 o'clock mass, and followed by a day of chores. So he would make me pay for every beer I had. My mother, on the other hand, would make sure that Tuesday night at 8 o'clock was clear because I was going to the AA meeting with her,
Right.
Tuesday night Bainbridge. And that meeting still exists. And so there was this weird thing, and I would like go to these meetings with my mom and my stepdad, and I would listen to the funny. I'd listen to a lot of drunkalogs. I think I don't think I would listen to a whole lot of spirituality or recovery. And I remember seeing one or two kids my age in there, and I'd be like, "Oh, your parents must have caught you too." And this was the '80s, right? And then I think that's about the same time that recovery centers and rehabs started accepting insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a kid in the '80s and you got caught drinking for the 10th time, or got caught smoking marijuana, or I remember a lot of friends getting shipped off to rehab in the '80s. You would see kids, come and go through those rooms, but my mom would that was my punishment. And it wasn't always punishment. I remember going to like anniversaries, and I remember seeing a Father Martin Chalk talk, and I just remember she was happier, and there was life in her eyes, and things were better for the family. And so that's how it went. And I graduated high school, and I graduated when I was 17, and I had joined the Navy the year before. And at 17 years old, in August of '84, I shipped off to the Navy. We went to boot camp. I remember the very first weekend when I graduated boot camp, I probably overdid it a little bit. And then from there, I went to A school. I remember getting as drunk as I'd ever been in my life up to that point. We would go out. I went to A school in Lakehurst, New Jersey, where the Hindenburg went down. Every weekend we would go to the shore, and we would get somebody to buy us a bottle of Jack Daniels and a 12-pack or two of beer, and we would pass that bottle around before going to the club. We were all underage, and I didn't really like Jack Daniels, but I would kind of force it down anyway. And this went on a couple weekends, and about the fourth weekend, we went to a party at a hotel, and somebody had a bottle of Southern Comfort, and I just assumed that was just like Jack Daniels, and I took a sip off of it, and I realized that it was something completely different. And I drank about 3/4 of that bottle on a Friday night, and I think that was lucky that it was a 3-day weekend. I think I got out of bed on Tuesday, and I haven't touched Southern Comfort since.
So that was the lesson.
That was the lesson, that Southern Comfort was bad. And I went overseas in the Navy, and I went to Rota, Spain for 2 years. And being in the Navy was just like having a 9-to-5 job. And I was on my own for the most part. I worked hard and I played hard. I remember hearing later on in meetings that, a lot of people, before they hit their bottom, they have drinking, and then they have drinking with problems, and then they just have problems. Mm-hmm. And then I definitely started having drinking with problems in Spain, and I couldn't make it to work on time. I couldn't make a paycheck last from payday to payday. My bar tabs were more than my paycheck. So I'd have to switch bars, and I'd have to go drink at this bar for 2 weeks till I could pay that one down. And, I'd have to manage my bar tabs.
That's right.
But at the same time, like I was, I tell this people now. I'm in the restaurant industry, and I have a lot of employees and stuff, and they realize that I don't drink, and they were like, "Did you ever drink?" And I tell them I drank, when I was their age, and oh, what were you like? And I'm like, well, my going away party at Spain, I woke up out of a blackout the next day with $900 in my pocket, which is probably the only time that's ever happened. I was told later on that I drove a moped through a bar with naked, and that was the kind of drinking that I did. Like, beer tastes better with your pants off, I guess.
So a moped through a
it's-
bar naked.
Yep,
That's interesting.
in a blackout.
Aren't you glad? Like I am very glad that they did not have
Cell phone.
the kind of video
Right.
equipment that they did when I was drinking
Yes,
that they do
yeah.
now.
Absolutely. My lawyer I probably would have had to have a lawyer. And that was just, I remember pleading with my boss to put me on the night shift so I wouldn't be late. So I'd come in at 3:00 and instead of, have to come in at 8:00, and I won't be late if I come in at 3:00. And, it took about 4 weeks and I was late, coming in for, cause I could stop drinking at 4 a.m. instead of 2 a.m. I remember that to this day. It's like yesterday. I remember the first time I was late because I overslept for my 3 p.m. shift. And luckily I didn't get in too much trouble, I guess, back then. I did have the mayor of the time. For some reason, I like to fight a lot when I drank. And the mayor had called the captain of the base and said, if we break up another fight with him in it, we're going to ask you to kick him out of the country. And that didn't happen, but there were certainly warnings there. From there, I went to Ridgecrest, California, China Lake, California, a naval base in the middle of the Mojave Desert north of Edwards. And the entire population of that town is about 28,000 people. And my drinking kind of continued the same way, and I worked with a lot of people who drank like me, so it was kind of normal. But the difference was, that when their alarm went off, they got up in the morning, and I still had troubles getting to work. So the problems were starting to build, and people were starting to get tired of my actions.
Shenanigans.
Right. And so I would try to be a good sailor. And I remember very specifically the last few months of my drinking that I didn't drink every single day, but there was definitely days where at 9:00 in the morning, I would be like, okay, I have a big day tomorrow and it's important tomorrow. So I'm not going to go out tomorrow. And then about 11:00 at lunch, I'd be like, well, I could just have, 2 at happy hour at 4 with the guys. And then the next thing I know, with the snap of the finger, I would be like, it's 3 a.m. And I would think to myself, like, how did this happen again? And that was the first inkling of maybe there was an issue.
How old were you at this point, approximately?
20. And so I still can't even drink legally, right? In the United States. So. But it was always, that. And it had also come to the point of my life, and I guess this was more hindsight and after I got sober that I realized, but that drinking had become my default reaction to life. If I had a bad day, if I got yelled at by my boss, that was a good reason to drink. If I'd had a good day, that was a reason. I mean, my default reaction to everything that happened in life was to pick up a beer or pick up shots of tequila or whatever it was I was drinking. And but I just remember that the feeling of how did this happen again at 3:00 in the morning when I'd planned on not doing that. I had made deals with myself. I prayed about it. I, said, don't let this happen. And every time it would happen, it would just, how did this happen again? So finally, enough was enough, and it happened one too many times, and I was late for work one too many times. And my boss, I didn't give him any other choice, and he said, "Fine, you're going to you're going to captain's mast, which is pretty much like misdemeanor court, I guess. You go in front of the captain, and he says you've been late this many times, and he could take a stripe or put me in restriction or fine me." And do those things, and it certainly doesn't look good on your record. And while it wasn't a major thing, like a not get kicked out of the Navy kind of thing, it was not something you'd wanted to happen. My sister was getting married. This was December of 1987. My leave had already been approved, and they said, "We'll deal with you when you get back." And I said, "Okay." I very distinctly remember like being worried about captain's mast on the plane. And I had an epiphany on the plane. And I said, I am going to go to Tuesday night Bainbridge with my mom while I'm home on leave. And I'll do that for the 2 or 3 weeks that I'm home. And I'll go in front of that captain. I'll be like, the problem is I'm an alcoholic, Captain. And he'll pat me on the back and say, good job for discovering that yourself, and send me on my way. That's what I thought in my mind. And it hadn't occurred to me at that point that I had a problem necessarily. I'm pretty sure in the month of December, I remember opening a beer at 5 a.m. after I woke up, and I had purposely left it open so it was flat and warm. It would stay down. I guess I didn't consider that morning drinking, but I guess, that's kind of what it was. Mm-hmm. But I remember having this like great idea to get the captain off my back, was to use my mom and listen in those meetings and have enough. I knew enough about AA that I might be able to speak the language in front of the captain and impress him. So I did that. I started going to meetings with my mom, and I said, I think I might have a drinking problem. Maybe I should go to some of those meetings with you. And she said, okay. And she kind of left me to my own, we would get to the meeting and she would go sit with her friends. And I remember
good
those
for
meetings.
Her. She knew enough to kind of stay out of the way. Huh?
Yeah, she did. And she turned me over to the men. And for like 2 weeks, they picked me up every day and would take me to meetings and take me to, I remember going to Harbor Light in Cleveland, which is kind of a Skid Row kind of, meeting where a lot of maybe the street guys go. And a woman touched the top of my hand, and she said, how long have you been sober? And I was like, 5 days. And she said, how on earth do you look so healthy? I didn't really pay attention to those meetings. And I do remember that originally I had stopped drinking on the 19th. So I remember being in a meeting with her, and I remember there was a girl that I went to school with was the lead, and her and I had nothing in common. She hung out with different people than I did growing up. She went to college. I went to the Navy. She was in a sorority. I didn't relate to anything she talked about at all until she was talking about her drinking. And she said, it's 3 a.m. and how did this happen again? And a little light bulb went off in my head. And I said, oh, wait a second. And that was like the first time I really related to anybody in a meeting where I felt like that had happened to someone else as well. And I remember introducing myself as an alcoholic. I think at the end of that meeting, they gave me another opportunity to do so. And I think I did stand up and introduce myself. Christmas Day came. I remember being at my uncle's house all day long. He kept asking me if I wanted a beer. And I was like, no, thanks. No, thanks. I was doing fine. I remember coming home. My mom dropped us off at my dad's house at like 11 o'clock on Christmas Day. I popped a can of beer in the fridge, all in the kitchen, all by myself. I drank one. I drank the second one. Before I knew it, I was out in the garage because we had a refrigerator out there, and I was looking around for more beer. And something clicked in my head where I said, how did this happen again? And I just went downstairs and I fell asleep on the couch, and I don't think I even threw those beer cans away. I know I didn't, and I got woken up by my father, and it was just his voice, and I could see his silhouette behind me when he woke up, and the only thing he said was, "I thought you were going to quit drinking."
Mhm.
And for the first time in my life, I felt ashamed of my drinking, just from those 2 beers. And I had certainly done things while I was drinking that were probably regrettable and shameful, but I don't remember ever feeling shame for those things. And I always remember I would use blackouts as an excuse for my behavior, as I didn't remember. And I remember, the rules don't apply. And if you were in a blackout, then everything was forgivable, right? December 26th, 1987 is my sobriety date. And I went to those meetings in Bainbridge. And back then, in around Cleveland, there was, on the east side of Cleveland, there was one big meeting a night for the most part. And Bainbridge Tuesday would get 350 people at it and be long rows of tables. And my mom would sit with all the ladies and they would knit, and, they would do a 50-50 raffle, and comments would go on. It was a full lead and comments afterwards. And sometimes those meetings would go an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. And
so I got a question for you real quick. I've been up to Cleveland many times. There was a couple of meetings that I went to. One of them was the Newberg group.
That's an old timer meeting.
Oh man, and if you're listening and you're part of the Newberg group, I still remember. I mean, I couldn't even believe it. Everyone was yelling at each other.
That's some old school AA there.
Old school confrontational meeting. I don't know. Is it still the same? Do they still
yes, it
yell
is.
at each other?
I don't know if they yell so much, and a couple of the old timers have gone away. But that's some old school Cleveland AA in that meeting.
Yeah, so I would say if you're traveling and you ever get a chance to attend that meeting, it's quite a show.
And it's an old meeting.
All right, so I got you off track. So you were going to
meetings, and they were all big, 350 people leads. And my time's up at home, and I go back, and I have a few days before I have to report back to work. But I go back to Ridgecrest, California, China Lake, and I get my little. They didn't have Google, so I had to look at my. Probably the phone book or a California meeting directory. And I was like, oh, okay, there's the Alano Club on High Street, and 28,000 people in the town. And so there's an Alano Club in Ridgecrest, California, and there's 21 meetings a week, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, maybe couple more early birds or something. And, that's about all there is for meetings in Ridgecrest, California, unless you wanted to go to the candlelight meeting on Monday night where all the hippies, talked about feelings and stuff. And, that was at somebody's house. And, I remember going to a meeting, and I opened the door, and a woman turns her head as I was walking in, because, being a proper newcomer, I was exactly 5 minutes late and leave, the second that our father was finished. But I opened the door to this meeting, and the woman turned to me and she goes, honey, this is a woman's only meeting. You can't come in here. And I got my first AA resentment. And,
right.
And I was like, I was mad, and I was like, I'll show her. And I showed her by going to another meeting. And, later that night, and I started, and probably for the first 6 months that I would go to this, it was the same 45 people all the time, of 28,000, maybe 45, maybe 60 people that were going to meetings. And I'm 21 years old, and the nearest person that first year in the meetings there was another kid my age who would take a newcomer chip like once every 2 weeks. He just wasn't getting it, and I didn't really hang out with him too much. And then he would come and then he'd be gone for 3 weeks or a month. And so I would just go to these meetings, and it was all old guys and old people, and they're in their 40s and 50s, probably their 30s. But when you're 21 and the next youngest person in the meeting is 28, 28 seems a little old to you when you're 21. And they're discussion meetings. I'm used to 350 people in a room, and this is a big square table. And when your coffee cup gets empty, eventually somebody will come around with a pot and fill it. And at the end of the day, at the end of the meeting, somebody's cleaning ashtrays, and you could smoke in meetings back then. And I was pretty good at, when I got called on it, saying that I would just listen and I'll pass, thank you. And nobody really gave me much grief about it, but I didn't give people a whole lot of opportunities to get to know me either, because, like I said, it was convenient to be 3-4 minutes late and leave as soon as the Our Father was done. I would look around this room, and I remember thinking, and listening to the stories and listening to the people in the room that, like, I wouldn't drink with any of you. I don't want to go to a bar with any of you, much less sit in a room to listen to me tell you about drinking. All the old guys, they all had like nicknames. There was that woman who yelled at me was Crazy Margie. There was a Big Book Dick, Harry the Wino, Woody. Like they all and they laughed, and I didn't get their jokes, and they all, it got to the point where I would go to the meetings enough, and I would sit there in my head, and I would have this vision of like sitting next to Bob Costas and like doing play-by-play of the meeting and be like, oh, Hutch is going to speak now, and Hutch is going to be grateful because he didn't kill anyone today, and Harry the Wino is going to talk about his dreams of robbing a bank but never doing it in sobriety, and Big Book Dick is going to talk about the first 164 pages, and I would like nail it every time. And then Woody would speak, and Woody would at least 3 times a month for the first 4 years of my sobriety. Woody would tell this story, and Woody would say, if you take an orange seed and you plant it in your front yard, and you woke up the next day and there was an orange tree there with oranges on it, that would be a miracle. But if you take that seed and you plant it in your front yard and you give it sun and water and take care of it, and first year goes by and you give it fertilizer and you let it do its thing, and the second year goes by, and 4th, 5th, 6th year, and the 7th year, and finally you walk out of your house and you walk up to that orange tree and you pick an orange off of it. Well, that's still a miracle. And I remember thinking, like, no, you idiot, that's nature. That's how things work. But he would tell this story three times a month without fail. And, I would sit there in these meetings and just go, like, what am I doing here? And finally, like Harry the Wino and Leonard kind of pulled me aside, and they said, we're going to this weekend down in Laughlin, Nevada, an AA roundup. And Leonard was in the Navy. Leonard was a chief in the Navy. And he, unbeknownst to me, had made arrangements for me to have off for the weekend. So he said, pack your dress uniform, pack some clothes, we'll pick you up Friday morning or whenever it was that they picked me up. And it's like a 5-hour drive from China Lake to Laughlin, Nevada. Leonard and Harry the Wino had like 25 years sober. He would smoke cigars. He always wore flannel. He weighed about 85 pounds. And to me, he was like a royalty, I guess. And I didn't really speak to Harry unless I was spoken to. And he wasn't gruff. He was a very nice man. But so these two conspired against me to take me away for the weekend. And we're leaving, and we're going out of town, and they're like, oh, we have to make one stop, and they pull over to pick somebody else up, and they put Crazy Margie in the back seat of the car with me, and she talked the entire 5 hours down to Laughlin, Nevada. And Harry was pretty smart, and Harry would grab me, and he would be like, okay, we got stuff to do, and he would like send me up to the speaker meetings for like an hour and a half early to go save seats, and I'd have to go like put stuff on there and sit there for an hour and a half before the main speaker would start. And I would have to go register us for this, and I would have to go get us coffee. And for the first time in sobriety, like I had a great time, and I had a little bit of fun. And I remember the Saturday night speaker that weekend. This was May of '88, I think Mother's Day weekend, and the speaker was Paul O. From Dr. Alcoholic Addict. And to me, it was like a sign, because I didn't know how to pray, and I grew up Catholic, and getting on my knees and doing that stuff just didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me growing up, the whole loophole thing. And I didn't know how to pray, and I didn't really like organized religion too much. But somebody, and it could have been my mother, and it could have been somebody in a meeting, somebody had showed me 449.
Yeah, and just for people who may not know who Paul O is, just why don't you set it up? He wrote Dr. Alcoholic Addict, and he's the whole acceptance thing. Go ahead.
The acceptance is the answer to all of my problems today. And that used to be 449. Is it 417 now in the new?
Yeah,
new
they switch it around, and they're about to come out with a 5th edition. If they keep it, it'll be another one.
I have one big book, and it's still
4th edition.
4th edition. So 449. And that, and I would listen to like Big Book Dick, who was this little big book thumper in the meetings. And I always got the impression that Big Book Dick didn't like me too much, and I didn't really necessarily care for him. And he wouldn't, if it wasn't the first 164 pages, he wasn't going to talk about it. And that kind of made me upset, because some of those stories, Keys to the Kingdom and 449, played a big part in my early sobriety, because there were things I could relate to. And I used that acceptance. That was my prayer every night, that I would open that up and get down on my knees, and I would read that. And it helped me day in and day out. And I got to tell you that the other big thing that helped was not drinking, right?
Right.
Because sometimes we don't really talk about this in the meetings, right? But I can tell you that first 6 months, I'm 2 weeks sober when I get to back to Ridgecrest, and I'm not drinking, and it wasn't always easy to not drink. But I can tell you some things happened. And just because I went to meetings and I didn't share, and just because I went to meetings and I sort of listened, but I went to meetings and I did not drink, here's what happened. I became a better employee in the Navy. I became a better son to my parents, because I would call them every couple of days. I became a better friend to my friends, because I was there, I guess. So things did improve in my life without me doing anything but not drinking. And sometimes I don't think we talk about that enough in Alcoholics Anonymous. That, somebody asked me the other day when they realized how long it had been since I had had a drink, and they were like, how did you do it? And I said, I didn't drink. And that's kind of a joke, but the fact of the matter is, that's it, right? You get to be, 35 years sober by not drinking. So to get back to, Dr. Paulo, we go on this weekend, and Harry just kind of takes over, and Harry and Leonard kind of co-sponsor me. Leonard Harry was Leonard's sponsor, and he told me that Leonard would be guiding me through the steps, and I just said yes. And then the other thing that happened when I got back from that weekend was somebody asked me to the meeting after the meeting, and I said yes. And it was at that part of the meeting when I finally realized that while I might not go drinking with any of you, having a scoop of ice cream and a cup of coffee after the meeting, nobody was going to point at us and be like, there they are. And it was at those meetings when I started to get the people that were sitting around me, the people that kept telling me the same stories over and over and over and over again, that I got to ask questions. And then I remember very specifically one night, because Harry had spoken about being in a hospital bed or something, and he was a wino. He said something about wine sores, and, I didn't know what wine sores were. And I got to ask somebody after the meeting, like, what are wine sores? And, that's a lot of drinking to get those. But I started to ask questions after the meeting and before the meeting. And before you know it, I was showing up 15 minutes early, and I was staying 15 minutes late and then going out for a cup of coffee afterwards. And before I know it, I was back in Cleveland, and I was my mother was handing me her 1-year chip and speaking in front of 350 people, my first lead in AA, which probably was like 15 minutes long. And, and the other thing that happened was, like, all of my friends were like 40, 50, and 60, 75-year-old guys. And I hung out with like old guys. And it was fun. And besides showing me the steps, those guys showed me what it took to be not just sober, but a sober man, and be responsible. Not that my dad didn't try, but when you hit 15 and you know better than your father, you don't tend to listen a whole lot. And I started hanging out with these guys, and they taught me how to tie a tie and balance a checkbook and put $1 in the basket every time and save that $1, when you wanted to do something else with it, and how to give back and how to be of service, and
be an adult, right?
Be an adult, and how to have friends and how to just enjoy life. And suddenly, a year into it, a couple of guys my age started showing up, and Todd showed up, and I remember Todd coming into meetings, and Todd and I started hanging out, and Todd has exactly 30 days less sobriety than I do. And there are times where that little competition may have helped. And Todd and I are friends, to this day. We're great friends. And we just talked the other day, and we kept each other sober. And I can't tell you how many times, 2:00 in the morning at Denny's, drinking coffee, hanging out, talking AA, and just living our life was important to me in those early years of sobriety. And learning how to have fun not drinking, I guess, was...
Not drinking. That's interesting you say that, because your friend Tim F. comes up to me on a consistent basis and says, maybe you guys get it from each other, I don't know. He says, you still not drinking?
Yeah, he does. He says that to me too.
Not drinking.
Still doing that not drinking thing? But I think that came from somebody not in the program asking him about that, and then and then him 12-stepping that person.
Yeah.
You still doing that not drinking thing?
Right. Still doing that not drinking.
So I'm 13 years sober. I'm married, living in Cleveland, and I was training for a new job in Albany, New York. And I come home for a 3-day weekend. My wife is at her job. I discover evidence that she had been having an affair. And I was devastated. And I remember calling her and telling her to come home right now. And I remember pacing around the house in circles. And my thoughts were that I was going to throw all of her stuff on the tree lawn, that I was going to go find that guy and kneecap him with a baseball bat, that I was like, I'll show her, I'll be hanging from that chandelier when she comes home. That chandelier will never hold my weight. That's plaster and lath. That'll break. I'll never fix that plaster and lath, and that's expensive. And, oh, yeah, I hate her. And then storming around and thinking all the other things that were going to happen to me because of what she did to me. And she comes home, and I end up going to a meeting that night, and I settle down, and I have to go back the next day, and I'm on the plane back to Albany, and I'm thinking about how much plaster and lath cost to repair, and we're landing on the plane, and I look out, and there's striations down, and there's all the leaves, the autumn leaves in New York at that time, and I'm thinking about how awful it was that she did this to me, and then it occurs to me that I never, in that moment, never thought about having a drink. And then that very instant, I had realized that damn orange tree. Like, I finally, after 13 years of sobriety, realized that I'd had a personality change strong enough to relieve the obsession to drink, and nobody told me. And that was a miracle, because that is the spiritual experience, right? Changing our personalities to relieve us from alcoholism. And I'd certainly heard stories time and time and time again of people who had burning bush moments, and that was never me. And I was of the educational variety that they talk about in the appendix in the back of the big book. But, I guess I'm a slower learner than most, because it was 13 years before I realized the whole purpose of the orange tree. And it was 13 years before I realized that those old people and those guys in those meetings back in Ridgecrest told those stories over and over and over and over again, not because they like to hear themselves talk, but so I could understand the stories, no matter how many times it took for them telling those stories. And, thank God Woody told it just enough times, I guess, for me to remember when I had this moment in my life that everything seemed horrible. It was not my default reaction to even think about drinking.
Wow.
And
I love that.
Thank you.
I love it.
And then as a follow-up to that, about 2 years ago, I became the guy in Ridgecrest with Tim and I in that meeting. I became the guy who always told the orange tree story. They'd be like, "Oh, you're the guy who tells the orange tree story." And I'm like, yeah. I get a text like 2 years ago from a kid that I had sponsored in Colombia, and it'd probably been 8 years or 6 years since I had seen him. And the text just said, "The orange tree. Now I get it." And I told him, my reply was, "Well, it only took you half as long as it took me. So good for you."
That's funny. That's funny. So, well, just real quick follow up. Also, what happened with that, with your situation with your?
Oh, so
wife?
I always forget to talk about this whenever, and people, every other third time I ever tell that story, somebody will come up to me. "Well, what happened between you and your wife?" "Well, we got a divorce." But we got through it probably friendlier than most, and I didn't drink because of it, and she's doing great, and I'm doing great. So.
Good. Well, Tim, this has been absolutely fantastic. I always read from page 164 of the big book to kind of close us out, and I'm going to do that right now. It says, "Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us, like me and Tim D, as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then." Blessings to you and all of the Cleveland AAers up
Thank
there.
you.
And once again, I sure appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Once again, Mr. Tim D from Cleveland, Ohio, appreciate your time and willingness to come on to La Sober Speak and share your experience, strength, and hope with the listeners. I'm sure they got a ton out of it. Now, if you did get a ton out of this, and who would not, please take some time to pause your device, maybe share this with another friend or family member. The episode may be just what they need today. All right. Now on to a little bit of listener feedback. Oh, and I think I told you at the beginning of this episode that when I was going through the introduction to Tim D that I was going to play a voicemail, and maybe we should start a new segment called, John M. Bites or John M. Sucks or something like that. And here is proof positive that there are folks out there that would probably be contributors to that particular segment. In fact, why don't we just start it right now? Here goes John M. Bites.
Yeah, here's my message. How about you stop talking so much? The beginning of the tape speakers and during the speaking time with the questions it's not about you, man. It's about the message. We see the name, we see the topic. That's what we want to hear. No offense, we appreciate your hard work, but don't really want to hear you. Want to hear about the topic.
All right. Well, I do have a couple of thoughts here. The first thing that came to my mind was, have y'all ever watched that Saturday Night Live episode? This is from quite some time ago. Anyway, and the woman would come on and she go, "Now simmer down, just simmer down." Well, that was the first thing that came to my mind. And here's what I don't get. If it's moi, and I am watching some particular TV show or listening to a podcast or whatever, and I don't care for the content, well, in my case, generally speaking, I just turn the station, turn the channel, turn whatever, sometimes figuratively speaking and sometimes literally speaking, but I just go to another station. And so there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I've listened to a lot of other good podcasts on sobriety, actually. And so there's a lot of stuff out there. So, and another thing, if you take moi, out of the equation, and I'm not asking questions, and I'm not giving an introduction, and I'm not doing listener feedback, I mean, isn't that just called like a speaker tape? I mean, am I right? There are a bajillion. Is bajillion a real word? I don't think so, but nonetheless, there are a bajillion of speaker tapes out there all over the interweb, and you can get them at any conference that you go to. Now, this particular gentleman here, he left me a voicemail. Most people who leave a voicemail will leave an email that goes with it. Unfortunately, I don't have the email, so this is the only way that I can respond. So it was an anonymous voicemail, and I'm hoping he's listening to me because Mr. Anonymous, I'm assuming, by the way, that's a Mr. Sounds like a Mr. to me, but Mr. Anonymous, that's what we'll call you. If you're listening, please email me at JohnJOHN at soberspeak.com. And I really mean this. And here's what I would love to be able to do for you, because it's interesting. A big part of why I started this podcast is because I couldn't find anything else that I liked, that was what I was looking for. And I will be happy. Now, I'm a pretty busy guy, like most of us, right? But I will be happy to carve some time out of my schedule and walk you through how to create, how to build from the ground up your own podcast. Now, it's a lot of work. I'm not going to lie to you. But I'd be willing to kind of teach you the basics and get you going. And then you can, and I really mean, I'm not being facetious about this. I really mean that I think that the world, I'm not the only messenger of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Or the 12 steps or anything obviously. But I think that the more choices that the public has, it's just like meetings, right? This is what happens with meetings. Somebody will go to a meeting. Maybe they get some sort of resentment or they don't like it or whatever. They take their coffee pot or buy another coffee pot, and then they go to start a meeting. And that's how if things progress and they're the evolution, if you will. And I'd love for you to be part of that. So, another thing that I remember when I heard the voicemail, I don't know why, this popped into my head, but it did. And it was that, it's like Sammy Davis Jr. from like the 1950s. And he used to sing a song and it went, I gotta be me, I gotta be me. Oh, whether I'm right, oh, whether I'm wrong, I got to be me. I really can't do a Sammy Davis Jr. impersonation, but nonetheless, I started singing that in my head. I guess one of the things that I have learned over my time in Alcoholics Anonymous, first of all, I'm not really a confrontational guy. However, I don't like to go head on into confrontation, but I don't avoid it if it's necessary, you know? And I have learned that for me, I've got to be true to my own self. And by the way, if I did not put like an introduction on the beginning and all the listener feedback on the end, believe me, folks, this thing would take me so much less time. But so far, between me and my higher power, it seems like the right thing to do. Have you ever been to a meeting, an AA meeting or whatever 12-step program you go to, and something controversial comes up in the meeting? Maybe it's like people claim that this is the only way to do the steps, or this is exactly what the founders meant by such and such, or somebody does something that's kind of inappropriate. Maybe they're speaking about alcohol and drugs and other outside issues, as they call it. And what happens is there's tension in the room. Well, in many ways, that tension is productive for me because it helps me to crystallize in my head what I really believe. And what is the right thing between me and my higher power? Maybe even what is the best thing for, maybe I need to take a back seat, and what is the best thing for Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole? And so that's what that tension does for me. And Mr. Anonymous, thanks for leaving the voicemail. I appreciate it. It definitely got me thinking, and I'm hoping it did the same for the listeners as well. Now on to a little bit more listener feedback. Connie writes in. Connie says, "Hi, John. I'm a grateful member of Al-Anon since September 2018, and I found your podcast via The Recovery Show." Yes, my friend Spencer. She says, "I just love the experience, strength, and hope shared there, and I took Spencer's recommendation to take a listen to your show, and I'm so glad I did." And we're glad you did too, Connie. As a mom with a son in recovery, I make it a point to learn everything I can about the disease of alcoholism. I would do the same if he had cancer, diabetes, or any other disease. I like how you put that, Connie. I am in central New York, just to the east side of Syracuse in my beautiful Madison County. Unfortunately, there are so many families like ours, powerless over alcoholism, gathering together and sharing experience, strength, and hope. Your show, on Brian P.'s story, God's Not Through With Me Yet. Yeah, that was excellent, wasn't it? Gave me a program friend, and I so much connect with him. How grateful we are, no matter which program, to have God in the details. Big hearts. Thank you for all you do for the families of both programs. The love can be felt in all you do and through your guest shares. A very grateful mom in Canastota, New York. My home meeting is in Peterborough, New York. The United Methodist Church, Thursday, 7 p.m., a 4-step meeting, and 8 p.m., a step study. So if y'all are up there for that meeting, please be sure to tell Connie I said hello. And then she signs it with, oh, this is from Lois Remembers, "The well of love refills itself. The more one gives of love, the more one has to give. Lois remembers, page 195. Thanks, Connie, for writing in. Vicky writes in, and Vicky says, "Hi, John M. I live in Brownsville, Texas, and I just started listening to your podcast on my daily walks instead of getting worked up listening to news." Good for you, Vicky. I am 7 years sober thanks to this program and active in the program here in Brownsville. I am a recent resident of Texas. I moved from D.C. a year ago, originally from New York City. Well, that must be quite a culture shock coming from D.C. and New York down to Brownsville. Glad you're enjoying it down there. She says, so far, Mickey B's story has resonated with me the most, but I just started listening to you a few days ago, and I will keep coming back. P.S. I downloaded the Spiritual Toolkit app, which another of your speakers had mentioned, and I really like doing the evening inventory. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was David G. who had mentioned that. For anybody else who wants to go out there and get it, we're not promoting it or anything like that, but it does seem to help a lot of people. The Spiritual Toolkit app, I think is what it's called. Beverly writes in and she says, "Hi, John. My sponsee just recently turned me on to SoberSpeak, and I'm really enjoying listening to a new way of thinking. We moved to San Antonio, Texas a little over a year ago. I learned of my alcoholism through Al-Anon, which I attended because my previous husband was an alcoholic. My current husband is a normie and has never seen me drunk. I hope all is well in your world, Beverly C." Well, Beverly C., all is dandy here, and the same to you. B. Sue writes in, and that's short for Barbara Sue. B. Sue. She says, "Good morning, John M. I am a fellow traveler in the Gary K line. Introduce me to SoberSpeak this week." So, just as a reminder, I know I said this on the front end, but we are going to have the Mr. Gary K as a guest, a speaker at our live event on December 2nd in Frisco, Texas. And if you go to our website, soberspeak.com, and click on the tab at the top, it says SoberSpeak Live. You can see all the deets there. Anyway, B. Sue goes on. "My AA birthday is 12/1 of 2019. Oh, you're coming up on a birthday here. She says, "I grew up in an alcoholic home. My first drink was at 12 years old. I hated the taste, but I liked the buzz." Think I can relate to that. She says, "I drank for years very cautiously because I couldn't drink like my alcoholic mom. The last 10 to 12 of my working years, the booze drinking symptoms were in full force. The insanity, emotional suicide drinking days. I knew about AA from my mom's sobriety journey, and oh yeah, the mandatory Alateam meetings, open AA meetings, which were both required and demanded by mom, and my Al-Anon meetings. My exes had a problem, not me," laugh out loud. I found AA myself after my last geographical move. I went from Louisiana back home to Texas. I stopped drinking just for my first hip surgery, in July of 2019, and came through the Archway that December. Thank God, Archway with a big O, capital A. I've had the, quote, isms forever, born into the world of alcoholism. I'm walking today in a grateful sobriety and some semblance of wonderful sanity that's still budding. The journey, this way of life that really works, it saved my life. My heart's desire is to stay sober, to share the love and service others so freely shared with me. B. Sue. Well, B. Sue, thank you very much. Thank you very much, B. Sue. I appreciate you writing in, and I'm glad that you have caught fire. I believe that is another episode down the tubes of down the tubes. I'm sorry, I got distracted. I was looking over at a football game. Okay, you caught me. Okay, I fessed up. There you go. Anyway, that's another episode of Sober Speak Down the Drain. That doesn't sound right though. Down the drain. That makes it sound kind of like negative. That's another episode of Sober Speak in the books, in the can. Another one that shall be released shortly. Anyway, God bless you. May God keep you until then. Keep coming back. It works if you work it. Love you guys. Thanks.